Resource CSRD Networks 10 and 12 present part 2 of the 4-part series on Getting Your Kidney Offer, Finding Your Match, featuring Dr. Clifford Miles, transplant nephrologist at the University of Nebraska Medical Center and its partner hospital, Nebraska Medicine in Omaha, Nebraska. In part 1 of this series, we learned about treatment options for end-stage kidney disease, the availability of kidneys, and how to get on the transplant waitlist. We will begin with Dr. Miles discussing finding your match.
So let's move on to finding a kidney that actually matches you. Again, this has to do with very important information that's being obtained through the transplant evaluation. Now, there are two types of blood compatibility that we think about from the transplant perspective. The first is the ABO blood type compatibility. As you may or may not know, all humans have one of 4 blood types, A, B, O, and AB. Shown on the right is sort of a pie graph of the percent of people in the United States with each of these blood types. Note that A and O are roughly equal with 40-some% of the population, whereas B and AB represent far fewer people. Also of importance is that we are naturally immune to the blood group that we don't have. What this means is that people with blood type A automatically have antibodies against anybody with blood group B. Similarly, people with blood type B automatically have antibodies against the blood group A. People who are O actually have antibodies against both A and B. And finally, people with AB have antibodies to neither. It's very important because you can't get a kidney from a donor if you have an antibody to that blood type. The other system of antibodies that transplantation needs to worry about is called HLA. Now, HLA stands for human leukocyte antigen. This is a very important system of molecules which is key to our immune system. This has everything to do with how we defend ourselves against bacteria and fungus and viruses and other things out in nature. It's also a more complicated system in that there is a system of letters and numbers that enumerate a large number of molecules that participate in this immune system. There are actually tens of thousands of combinations of HLA molecules that help build our immune repertoire on cells. Now, they have interesting nomenclature so that a human may be an A323, B4950, DR1317, DQ26. There are actually more letters that are less important for transplantation, and we tend to set aside in the workup process. Now, unlike the ABO system, humans do not automatically have antibodies against HLA. However, through sensitizing events in life, we may develop them. The 3 categories of sensitizing events include prior blood transfusion, pregnancy, or prior organ transplant. PRA is an abbreviation that transplant teams use to talk about this sensitization. It stands for panel reactive antibody. But basically, it is a percent number between 0 and 100 of other humans' HLA that you have antibodies to. A high PRA, closer to 100%, becomes a significant barrier to getting a kidney transplant because it means that you are incompatible to more potential donors. I think an example would help. So if a transplant candidate undergoes testing and is found to have an antibody to HLA A1, and if that A1 is found in 10% of the general population, then the candidate's PRA is said to be 10%. And this means that 10% of potential donors would be incompatible with that candidate. The more HLA antibodies an individual has, the higher the PRA, and therefore the harder to match. And why does this matter? That matters because it means that individuals are more likely to wait longer on the waiting list before a compatible kidney can be found. So now we have more information that we need to include as we put people on the waiting list. So we need to know their blood type, their HLA type, and in particular, what we call unacceptable antigens to HLA. Remember, the donated kidney must be compatible with the recipient, so we need to tell this computer system what to avoid or accept for you. Back in the previous example, A1 would be listed as an unacceptable antigen. And remember, people can have 0 unacceptable antigens or up to even dozens or more unacceptable antigens. The allocation system has to know these unacceptable antigens, and it also has to know the blood type of every candidate and every donor. Finally, as centers finish waitlisting an individual, there are items called kidney donor acceptance criteria that must be entered. Remember, candidates can only be eligible for kidneys that are compatible and fit these acceptance criteria. Some of these are variables from the donor itself, the age of the donor, the time the organ spent outside of the body, or ischemic time, the final serum creatinine from the donor, and others. The number of mismatches between the candidate and the donor is also important. And then whether the donor has hepatitis B or hepatitis C or other viral infections. There will be more on hepatitis C later. Usually, a transplant program actually sets defaults for these criteria that then are applied to all of their waitlisted patients. One notable exception is called the Kidney Donor Profile Index, or KDPI. So the KDPI is another numeric scale, this time with reference to donated organs. It is numbered from 1 to 100%, with lower numbers generally associated with better graft function or kidneys that are expected to work for a longer period of time. There are 10 variables obtained from the kidney donor that go into this calculation, and they are shown in this box at the right. Note that donor age and the final serum creatinine are important in this calculation. It's also important to know that this data is based on kidneys that are used for transplantation, not just all kidneys donated. And this is important because while it is true that kidneys with a higher KDPI are expected to not work as long, they still are good kidneys and can be very important for getting individuals off of dialysis. That being said, transplant centers must have written consent from patients before making them eligible for offers from kidneys with KDPI greater than 85. In the blue box is an important concept, though. If patients restrict the KDPI of offers they are willing to look at, it will translate into likely waiting longer for transplant. There is some temptation on patients' parts, and sometimes on transplant teams' parts, to say, I would like to wait for a kidney with a low KDPI, like less than 30. That may be reasonable in some situations, but remember, any restriction will likely mean waiting longer for that kidney offer to come.
This concludes part 2 of our 4-part series on getting your kidney offer, finding your match. Be sure to listen to parts 3 and 4 to learn more about kidney transplantation and getting your offer. We encourage you to use your blood type to figure out who you may and may not be compatible with. This is good information when looking for a living donor, as well as understanding. For additional information, you can visit www.qsource.org/ESRD networks.